It's the Opperman Report. Join digital forensic investigator and PI Ed Opperman for an in-depth discussion of conspiracy theories, strategy of New World Order resistance, high-profile court cases in the news, and interviews with expert guests and authors on these topics and more. It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome back to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, private investigator Ed Opperman. Okay, now we were talking to our guest, David Cae Johnston, who, by the way, I thought was going to be here for 2 hours. I just found out right before the show that he can only do 1 hour. That's okay. That's okay. That's okay. That's okay. What do you call it? The Making of Donald Trump. You can find his work at the Daily Beast, and he really, really is doing some incredible work with these investigations. This story about the scorpion and the frog, I tried to locate one of the authors of that book, who was mixed up with this guy Sater. Sater's involved right now. He's a Trump employee, man, has an office in Trump organization, business card, says he works for Trump, and had some kind of stabbed the guy with a margarita glass. Well, not that I haven't done that myself, but the thing is too. But then also too was some kind of operative as an Central Intelligence Agency. So very, very interesting cast of characters around this Mr. Trump. Okay, all right. He was involved in this $40 million stock swindle, and he got paid a $25,000 fine. And no jail time. And no requirement to make restitution. I read about this story on the air one night. So very, very interesting stuff. Check out the Daily Beast for all of Mr. David Cae Johnston's work. And remember, that's K. His middle name is C-A-Y. It's not the letter K. A couple of things I can add to our discussion here with the wonderful Mr. Johnston. Because I had all these questions I was looking forward to asking him. It's funny, he mentioned the story about Marla Maples. I told the story on the air a couple of times, but you never know. Maybe I picked up a new listener in the past week. He said how he knew about Marla Maples 9 months before it broke in the press. The day that thing broke in the press, what happened with me was I used to have to fly for my business back in those days. I used to have to fly a lot. I traveled quite a bit. And so I knew a lot of flight attendants. I used to date a lot of flight attendants and date people, That was my lifestyle back in those days. And so in Manhattan, there was an apartment. With these flight attendants, what they'll do is they'll all rent an apartment together. They're like 10 of them will rent it because there's only 3 or 4 of them staying there at any given time. Every now and then, you got 5 or 6 people staying there by accident. They all wind up there at the same time, and people are just, crashing all over the place. So one night we were out, and these women said to me, well, you never believe who's up in our apartment right now. And I said, who? I said, Marla Maples. Because Donald Trump had just gotten caught cheating on Ivana, his wife, with Marla Maples. It was just the same weekend. So the tabloid press was all over this story. And I said, well, what's she doing up there in your apartment? She's hiding out from the tabloids. She's hiding out from the paparazzi. So a little bell went off in my head. A little light bulb goes off over my head. Or a bell. I might have been wearing a bell around my neck. Who knows? But as a joke, I said, well, let's tap the phones. We could tap the phones. Because they didn't have cell phones back in those days. It was like 1985. I said, we'll tap the phones, and then we'll sell the information to the National Enquirer. There's a joke, I said. This is a big, funny joke. I was a funny guy in those days. Always making jokes. Always the joker I was. And everyone, was, Ed, we can't do that. So about a week later, or maybe it was like a month later, I was hanging out with some guys who knew Trump. I'll say who. It was Bo Dietl. I was hanging out with Bo Dietl at the Doral Inn, which is a really cool hotel across the street from the Waldorf. And so we also used to hang out at the bar at the Doral Inn. It was a real nightly hangout. They had a great happy hour. And so I made the same joke. I said, hey, you don't believe it. I think Trump's name came up. Because you got to remember, Bo had the contract for, he had a $500,000 contract to do security for Mike Tyson. So he was also Robin Givens, So he was all hooked up with Trump, up to his ears. And so I made that joke there again. I said, yeah, I met Marla Maples. She's staying with my friends. We were going to tap the phones. And what I think happened was I think someone at that little fun bar ran back to Trump and told him. And, put together a little file on me and delivered it to Trump. Because I ran into Trump, again, not even a couple of months after that. I ran into him at the U.S. Open. And we were sitting so close to each other. I had really great seats. My friend, I was dating a girl who worked for Sports Illustrated who could get us these great box seats for any kind of event. We had great box seats for the Yankee Stadium and all this kind of, the Knicks and stuff. We got great seats for everything. Because she was a receptionist over there, but her job was she had the combination to the safe where they kept the tickets. Okay? So she doled out the tickets. And so she would get us those tickets so we can go out. But I didn't get these tickets at the U.S. Open through my girlfriend Marnie, who was probably one of the cutest girls in the whole world. I got these tickets through another friend of mine who I think worked for Dean Witter at the time. So they did the Dean Witter box. Some very wealthy woman, older lady, who showed up later on. I went and got her some drinks and water and stuff like that because she was old. But we're sitting there, and Donald Trump's sitting like a little. I could throw a tennis ball, knocked his wig off. 10 feet away, And what happened was he was giving me dirty looks. He instead of looking at the game, I don't think he looked at the match one time. He was there with a couple of models. Very interesting. There was this young blonde model and she had her sunglasses off the whole time when she was talking to Trump, and all flirting with Trump. And he was giving me dirty looks the whole freaking time. Every time I would turn my head in his general direction, he was staring right at me. It's very uncomfortable to have Donald Trump giving you staring daggers at you, the U.S. Open, And it's funny, too, because then after he left, and he makes a big scene, he's like to attract attention to himself. After he left, the girl who was flirting with him and had her sunglasses off the whole time suddenly put her sunglasses on and was standing there complaining to her other little model friend who was there with her. Okay, what's going on here? Okay, thank you. Okay, what else can I share with you in this wonderful Saturday afternoon? No, it's not a wig, but there is a as far as Donald Trump's hair, there is a chapter in Ivana's book about Donald Trump, where she says that he went and got a hair transplant, and he's never denied that. Okay, that was one of my brushes with Trump. Another of my brushes with Trump was, first of all, the Tyson homes on Staten Island. In New Dorp. We always called them the Tyson Projects. This was a Donald Trump property. It started with Fred Trump, and then Donald Trump took it over. We always thought these were projects because they looked like projects and they smell like projects. When you go into the projects, they have that funny smell. That's what the Tyson Projects were like. And this is where, and New Dorp was a nice neighborhood on Staten Island back in those days. But the Tyson Projects were there. Tyson Homes, actually. And that's where you would go. That's where the drugs were. You could buy drugs there. And that's where they had prostitution out in front. And it was just like a housing project. And if you go online now and you look up the Tyson homes, you can find their rental, they're still in business. You can find their rental website. So Trump, everything has these glorious properties and stuff like that. You own a lot of two-family houses, too, on Staten Island. My friend, too, who when I was telling a story, when I was talking to Ted Rubenstein last night, we were talking about Bob Mayhew. And when I first came here to Las Vegas, the first week I was here, my friend who owned an alarm company, who in fact he was president of the Alarm Association for a while back in New York City, and he had moved here to Vegas before I did. So when I came out here and I moved here, he told me, anyway, he had contracts with Trump too, because he used to alarm Trump's properties, and he always got stiffed by Trump as well. And kind of an interesting story to fill in my story from last night with Ted Rubenstein, with Bob Mayhew. When I came here to Las Vegas, my friend told me, he says, hey, we made some excuse that he needed me to drive him around on errands, And so I was driving him around, and one of the places we went to the house of Bob Mayhew, who was a CIA agent and worked for Howard Hughes, involved in all kinds of shenanigans and funny business. And he was involved here in doing collections and stuff and all kinds of work for the casinos here in Las Vegas. It's a big, giant company. And I realized later on, now I guess it was sort of like a job interview for me, that my friend took me to meet Mayhew, thinking that, hey, if I presented myself well, I would get a job or some kind of an opportunity through Mayhew. And I guess that never happened because Mayhew was a licensed private investigator here in Nevada, and so was his son Peter. Until just recently, his son Peter just died. Okay, but anyway, that's the story about the Tyson homes on Staten Island. So I had that connection to Trump with Marla Maples. Then also, too, when I sold my condo on Staten Island, I sold it to one of Trump's bodyguards. This guy named Calamari, okay, like the squid, Italian squid, okay, and I sold him my condo right before I moved here. Yeah, Trump does not pay his debts. Everybody knows that. As long as with Dish and Dirt, I'll tell that too. So anyway, this guy was one of Trump's alleged organized crime bodyguards. See, because Trump has a security force of cops, but at the time, way back in the late '80s, and before the no, I sold that property in 2000. So I guess he still had some mafia guys walking around with him. They used to call him his walk-around man. This guy Calamari, and also too, if you listen to the A.J. Benza, because A.J. Benza was a gossip columnist in New York City, and he got into a big beef with Trump because they both were dating the same girl. And so they had a big fight on the Howard Stern show one day, and A.J. Benza talks about this guy, Calamari, this jerk that I sold my condo to, who was a total jerk, this guy. We had a little incident. I might as well tell the story, right? Because we got to kill an hour anyway, thanks to David Cae Johnston of The Making of Donald Trump. Okay. Let me tell you what happened is when I was selling my condo to this character, because I was getting married that week too, so we needed the money to pay for the wedding, and then to get the money from the wedding gifts to, we'll have the money back. So I was selling a condo and getting married. So we had a deal where I was going to sell this guy the condo. We were going to transfer the title, and he was going to buy my pool table too. I had a really fancy pool table up in because I had a loft. It was 2 floors. My condo was on the top floor, and I had 2 bedrooms and a loft, big giant loft with a pool table. It was beautiful. I would love to live there right now. I live in a hovel now compared to where I lived when I was a kid. Bought that place when I was like 20 years old. Anyway, back to the story. So the deal was I was going to sell him the property and then but stay in there for a couple of days until it was time to move. And that was our gentleman's agreement that we agreed to. But then when it came down to the closing, started demanding all kind of money, like, $300 a day to stay there, some kind of crap. So we just signed the paper when we got out of there. We had to move early. And also, too, I was closing down my office, too. I had a big office that we had to close down, too, because it was moving to a storefront. It was, anyway, going... So anyway, the guy would turn out to be a jerk. Also, too, I had one more little business deal with the Trump organization with his chief of security hired me to do a PI job for him. I think this is before he worked for Trump. And he stiffed me on that deal, too, as well. And he's a very well-known guy working for Trump right now. So I think that's pretty much sums up all my personal connections to Trump that I could think of off the top of my head. But let's see what else here is on my list. So we're talking about Donald Trump. The Making of Donald Trump. We just had the great David Cae Johnston. You can find his work on the Daily Beast. Really, really good stuff there. The story about Steve Wynn and his war with Steve Wynn. I told a whole story about that on the after show one time, about Trump's war with Steve Wynn. They had some kind of lawsuit going on. I don't have the details in front of me. I don't have those notes in front of me right now, but if you can go back and find it, it's really good information. Maybe I can go change the title or something so it'd be easier to find. Trump had hired this private investigator to dig up dirt on Steve Wynn and dig up dirt on Steve Wynn's mother. Okay? And what happened was Trump got killed in that battle with Steve Wynn because Trump's private investigator quit Trump and went to work. He was like a double agent. He started working for Steve Wynn and reporting to him all the dirt that he had on Trump. So it kind of blew up in Trump's face. Did a whole show on that. Mr. David Cae Johnston reports in his book as well, the book The Making of Donald Trump, that Donald Trump gives himself his own awards. He set up a little company with this mafia guy called No Socks, was his nickname. I forget his last name. But he lives in Fifth Avenue in Manhattan, and his mafia guy. And they set up a company called Diamond Awards. So Trump has all these golf courses and stuff like that. And what he does is, and by the way, too, Trump's his name is on the company. He didn't even set up a company under his friend's name. He has an award company under his own name, and then he gives awards to himself, and he puts the plaques on his golf courses and his hotels. We've won 5 diamond awards. We've won 7 diamond awards. Well, 3 years in a row. All this stuff like that. And on the plaque, it says, this plaque is bestowed on you by Donald Trump. He signs the plaque himself. So that's a real funny story that you can find in this book here. The Making of Donald Trump by David Cae Johnston. Okay, what else do I have here in my wonderful notes here? Yeah, I was going to say, Trump University. I wonder if they serve Trump steaks over there in the lunchroom over at the Trump University. Okay, back to Trump's helicopter pilot friend, and, my suspicions is that it would be more along the lines of the Jeffrey Epstein co-defendant lawsuit that Mr. Johnson doesn't like to it doesn't interest him. That Trump would be being sued for, raping a 13-year-old girl, and his co-defendant is convicted child molester, Jeffrey Epstein. He said it was his friend of 15 years. They lived next door to each other down there in Palm Beach. There's photographs of them together, him and Prince Andrew, the other one who's been pinned as molesting these little kids. A lot of the victims of Jeffrey Epstein, too. We just found out last night when I was listening to Pierce Redmond, because he had the guy from Gossip Extra, I think it's called, website that's doing a lot of great investigation. They're from Palm Beach, and they do a lot of great work on the Epstein case. A lot of good stuff they're doing down there, a lot more than... But what we found out is a lot of these other girls that were molested by Epstein, because he was molesting 3 girls a day, according to his butler's testimony, that a lot of these other girls also worked at Mar-a-Lago. It's all this time I thought it was just Virginia Roberts. The one who's part of this big federal lawsuit is the one who worked at the folding towels over there in the ladies' locker room at Mar-a-Lago. But what we found out last night was that there's several girls who worked in that locker room that were plucked away from there by Epstein's pimp, Ghislaine Maxwell. By the way, you want to look up... this show I'm talking about by Pierce Redmond, you can find it here on the archives at American Freedom Radio. Okay? And it's very good work. Pierce does great work. And I'm really glad he has a live radio show now. And you can find it here on the archives on American Freedom Radio. Gets into a lot of details about... a lot of stuff, too, about one of my former guests, Conchita Sarnoff. Okay? Check that out, too, as well. And her interest in connections and all this. Skullduggery, you might call it. Mr. Johnston had talked about Trump's helicopter pilot. And I've told that story a couple of times before. And it's a company that would provide Trump his personal helicopter, but also the helicopter shuttles that went back and forth from Manhattan. I think it was on 33rd Street. The 33rd Street heliport in Manhattan down to Atlantic City. And I've taken that helicopter. I've gone on dates to Atlantic City, and I've taken that helicopter back and forth. Back when I lived, wasn't here doing internet radio. The good old days. And like I said, that place, Ivana's restaurant down there at Trump Plaza, down at the, whatever it was, Trump Hotel, the first one he had down there, that was a beautiful, beautiful restaurant, man. First time I went there, and I went back there a few years later, and it was just a dump. So I've taken that helicopter back and forth a few times, okay? A couple of times I would take a limo down, but then I just want to get back home so fast, we took the helicopter back. It was a shuttle. And I used to gamble a lot, too, so you could work out a deal with them and either get it as a huge discount, but it wasn't very expensive at all. To take that helicopter, even if you want to pay for it. So, interesting story, because now we find out that this guy had connections to the Genovese and Gambino crime families. I got an interesting story for you that I bet you that even Mr. David Cae Johnston is not aware of. One time, there was a guy on Staten Island named Ionello Della Croce, okay? And his lawyer was I forget his name. Barry Slotnick. Okay. And Ionello Della Croce was, I think he was the number 2 guy under Castellano. But he was very, very high ranking, very powerful guy, very old. And he's the guy, too. There's different movies about him. You see him on the movies and stuff. They don't mention his name. But he's the guy that had the bowling alley inside his house on Staten Island. And he had a son named Armand Della Croce. Now, the thing was, too, when he died, Ionello Della Croce, they used to call him Mr. O'Neill, so that was his nickname. I think my guy, too, when I told you about Pete the Nut, I told the story about Pete Stanistrud. They used to work for me. I think he used to drive Della Croce's wife or his daughter around or something like that and do errands for her as well when he was driving me around. And what happened was people who didn't like Castellano always said, well, he'll be there forever as long as Della Croce is there. Until Della Croce dies, nothing will ever happen to Castellano. So Della Croce died of natural causes. Okay? And then shortly after that, Paul Castellano, who was the godfather of Gambino crime family, who lived on Staten Island as well, on Toad Hill, not too far from where my sister lives, was shot down by the John Gotti crew, right? And it was rumored that one of the gunmen who did the shooting that day was Armand Della Croce, Castellano's son. Now, I think that later on, that rumor has been proven false, and that he was not, because they got that guy Campisi, I think his name is, who does the mob updates, has that website with all the mob information, and I think he's ultimately fingered all the guys who did the shooting too. By the way, too, my show last night too, real quick. When I was talking to Ted Rubenstein about some John Gotti's driver who got killed as well, and I thought it was DeChico. The reason why I'm familiar with that name, DeChico was another guy that was killed. He was killed by a remote control bomb in his car, and I thought that was the one they were talking about. But it turned out that I was incorrect about that. But the reason why I'm so familiar with that name, DeChico, is because his wife, after he got blown up in that car, his wife moved next door to me in that condo where I lived on Staten Island. She had the place right next to me. After her husband was murdered, she got a settlement and moved there about a year later. Very nice woman. But Armand Della Croce, and what this has to do with Trump, is that it was in the newspapers that he was on one of these Trump helicopter shuttles one day, and he had with him a Mac 11 semi-automatic machine gun. The kind it's the little Mac 11. It's like the little Mac 10. It's the one you'd always see on Miami Vice. It was like a little machine pistol, and he had one of those on the helicopter, and he was waving it around on the helicopter. And when the helicopter landed, one of the other passengers on the helicopter called the cops and says, "Hey, man, this guy's waving around a machine gun on the helicopter. It's crazy, man. What's going on here?" And believe it or not, he was never arrested on that because it made the papers that the cops came and because he had a federal firearms license, and he was licensed to possess this machine gun. I don't know if he's the license to possess it on a helicopter, but he wasn't even arrested or charged with that case. But that's a little tidbit, little side story in our story here of the day of Donald Trump. The Making of Donald Trump by David Cae Johnston. You can find his work on the Daily Beast. Okay, this is when I start to run out of breath and run out of energy and run out of time. Let's see, what else do we have here? One of the first questions I asked him was kind of a joke about whether he thinks that Trump was placed in there, this conspiracy theory that Trump is placed in there to throw the election to the Clintons, that the Clintons somehow hired him as a, what do they call it, like a beard, to pretend he's running against them. Because if you look at him, the guy's just so self-destructive, just doing everything he can to destroy himself here. It looks like it's a possible situation, and that this guy's just throwing the race. But then again, you got to say, well, why would Giuliani be joined at the hip with him now? Because you hear now Giuliani's flying around in his plane with him at all these different events and stuff. Even when he doesn't appear, they're just hanging around like 24 hours a day. But if you look at Trump, his original campaign manager was Roger Stone. And Roger Stone has done that kind of thing before. He did it with Al Sharpton. Okay? Roger Stone was Al Sharpton's campaign manager when Al Sharpton ran for president. Now, there's a great series of... And I wanted to ask David Cae Johnston about that, but we didn't have time. And did I mention that, we were supposed to have 2 hours? Did I mention that? And then now I'm filling time with no notes. Doing not so bad, not having any notes, right, guys? I'd say so. They should double my salary here at the Opperman Report. I demand a raise, Danny. Okay. Danny's having a heart attack. Oh, no. That Opperman, I can't. Causing more problems for me. I got to get rid of that guy. But the point is that Roger Stone was Al Sharpton's campaign manager, too, and that was to split the Democratic vote. Roger Stone, a staunch Republican, supporting Al Sharpton, there could be no other reason for doing that unless you wanted to split the Democratic vote. Okay. Another thing you might want to know historically, Jesse Jackson. See, Jesse Jackson used to split the Democratic vote, too, and when he lost his race for president, he cut a deal with the Democratic Party where they paid for a plane for him and they got his son a Senate seat for D.C. and stuff like that. So he negotiated with the Democratic Party like a little nice golden parachute, promising not to run again and split the vote if they would give him all these kind of payoffs. So Al Sharpton seems to have gotten a different kind of deal. As you know, Al Sharpton had a history of working for the FBI and being an FBI informant. And much more than an FBI informant, he worked undercover for the FBI, creating cases for the FBI. Again, against a lot of these same guys that Trump seems to be buddies with. And Al Sharpton, his girlfriend, had a place at Trump Tower in New York. In Trump Tower, where all this, the drama takes place here in this campaign. And that's one of the apartments, too, I believe. I'd have to go back and double check. It's not in my notes because I don't have notes for the show. Is that... that red phone was in the girlfriend's house there in Trump Tower. Al Sharpton had a red phone, okay, that when he picked it up, the FBI was on the other line listening to all his conversations and all his phone calls. He had a special phone just for the FBI. This is how deep this guy was working for the FBI. He was creating cases. He was wiretapping people, walking around and wiretapping people, not to get out of a case. See, a lot of people think it's because he was doing some kind of drug deal. He's wearing a cowboy hat, and he was negotiating his drug deal, and they caught him on that, and then he went to work for the FBI. Now, I don't have my notes in front of me, and I can't remember why, but when I really did the research on this, I did a whole show about Al Sharpton one night, just by myself, where I just did a report for you. I concluded that he had to be working for the FBI before that drug deal, that undercover DEA videotape sting on Al Sharpton. He had to be. Okay? And I'm convinced of that. Also, there's a great series of articles in the Village Voice about Al Sharpton working for the GOP. Okay? And if you really want to understand Al Sharpton and his connections with Roger Stone, you got to look at all that stuff. But now, what's Al Sharpton's relationship with Donald Trump? What could it be? Why are they so chummy? Go to Google Images, Trump and Sharpton. They're hooked, they're joined at the hip too, and they're getting along great. You can see their pictures, they're getting along like buddies. I think they're involved in some promotions together too. And Sharpton was always involved too in ticket scalping scams and stuff like that. We had that woman on, I forget her name right now, the one who was raped by the Godfather of Soul, James Brown. And she has a lot of first-hand information about Al Sharpton. She's still having problems with Al Sharpton to this day. Now, a lot of people who just hear me for the first time, haven't heard my show before. I come from New York City, and I was an activist when I was a teenager in New York City, and with the Yippies, but also, too, with all kinds of different leftist organizations back in New York in those days. And one of the groups we would have to coordinate with for marches and protests and stuff like that was the Action Network, whatever it is, CAN it was called. I forget what it's called. And Al Sharpton's organization. So I had met Al Sharpton many times. And Al Sharpton knew me by face, and he knew me. I guess he knew me by name too, because I ran into him again years later, and I'm convinced too that I'm on his wiretaps too, because I met him later on at another location that I can't talk about it because it's work related. But I met him there, and he had the briefcase with him, and that was the kind of meeting where he would have been making wiretaps too. So I'm convinced I'm on those wiretaps with Al Sharpton. Oh yeah, okay. Just funny. I read a question about Trump not paying his debts, and it reminded me about Al Sharpton not paying his debts. Al Sharpton was known for never paying his taxes. First of all, he doesn't pay them now at all. I don't think he has any even pressure to pay them anymore. But he used to have problems with not paying his taxes. But he never paid his landlord. His landlord, what that organization was afraid of him, and because he had all these activists around him all the time, and all these thugs. And so he didn't have to pay his rent on his own. And his landlord was too afraid to evict him. So Al Sharpton's a real character. And if you look at the Village Voice series of articles about Al Sharpton and the GOP, he's been working for the GOP and the FBI his whole career. He's the one who brokered the deal to get Coretta Scott King at the Republican convention in the same skybox sitting next to George Bush and Barbara Bush. So this goes back a long, long time. I think Al D'Amato was the other one who he helped get elected. And he even said, too, when they asked him, "Oh, Al Sharpton, you run for all these offices and you never win." He says, "How do you know?" He says, "You don't know why I run for these offices. You don't know what my motivations are. You don't know what I'm more, So a lot of stuff going on there with Al Sharpton. And even he kind of admits it all the time. So when you hear these theories about, hey, is Trump playing a fake for the Clintons? He's got Roger Stone in there. So I don't know, man. I guess it's possible. Who really knows, though? Let's see how much time we got left. Losing my voice. Oh, okay. High sound coming from the speakers. Okay. Don King. Now, Don King, you can understand why Trump and Don King were buddies. Because of Donald Trump's boxing promotions. All of Tyson's Atlantic City fights took place at the Trump casinos down in Atlantic City. I used to go to all those fights. I was a huge Mike Tyson fan. And in fact, I ran into Trump there too. I saw him on an escalator one time. As a matter of fact, one time I was down there in Atlantic City. I forget which Trump property it was. It was the same one that had that Havana's restaurant, which I used to love. But on the escalator coming down was Donald Trump. Joe DiMaggio was on the escalator. And coming down the escalator was Kirk Douglas. Kirk Douglas on the escalator too. Kirk Douglas, Joe DiMaggio, and Donald Trump all on the same. Coming down that escalator together down at Atlantic City. But what's his relationship with Don King besides working on these deals together? By the way, too, there was a real rumor going around, and I think it's been confirmed, that Trump was sleeping with Tyson's wife, Robin Givens. And like I said, I was friends with the guys who had the contract doing the security for Mike Tyson, getting paid $500,000 a year. And there was all kinds of skullduggery going on. And Robin Givens definitely took Mike Tyson for a ride, stole a lot of money from him, her and her mother. But during all that, she became really close friends with Donald Trump. And the rumor was that those two were making out together and doing the naughty things together. So who knows? I think it even came out in a book later on that was kind of confirmed. And I think Tyson believes it too, although Tyson endorses Trump and seems to believe that Trump would be a wonderful president. That's a great endorsement, right? One rapist, endorses another rapist, right? That's how these things work. One rapist endorses another rapist. But Don King, did you know that Don King is a convicted murderer? Did you know that? How many people knew? Let's see some hands. How many people knew that Don King is a convicted murderer? Don King used to be a bookie. I think it was Chicago, wherever he was from. And he was a bookie. Some guy owed him money. And Don King went there, and I think he beat him to death. And Don King was convicted of murder. And he was going to get, I think he got 12 years or something like that on that murder. But he got out of it because they had another hearing on a Saturday. They called the judge in and had some kind of hearing on a Saturday where the judge signed an order giving him some sweetheart deal where he got out of prison early, got a shortened sentence. So look that up. Look up the facts around that. And Don King also now has a concealed carry permit in New York City, which is so hard to get. It's almost impossible to get. But Don King, convicted murderer, man, he's got one. You know, I had on I had on Richard Steele, the referee, who refereed a lot of those Mike Tyson fights and stuff like that. He knew Don King. And I used to ask him, it's in the members section, and I ask him a lot of these questions. And one of the things we were talking about, we can't even talk. We were talking off the air about some stuff. We can't talk about it here. I'm really running out. Let's see. Oh, yeah, here's one. Question I was going to ask. I'm going to have to really stretch this out. Make this portion really take some time. Is in that documentary by Libby. Again, I interviewed this woman named Libby, as her first name, and she's in the in my member section. She did a movie about Trump. It was silenced for like 20, 30 years, and there's a lot of great stuff in that movie. There's news coverage of Donald Trump, because one of the things he did was back in the early 80s, I guess it was, when he was just becoming a face in New York City news. This is after Woolman Rink, where he was such a hero because, he's going to build Woolman Rink for $10 million and, he's going to save this and he's going to get it done before budget, and he tried to make it sound like he did it for free. But he got $10 million, but a lot of the contractors that worked for him never got paid because he told them, oh, no, we're doing this pro bono. And so they did the work and they didn't get paid. But he did get paid. I think the next time he made a face for himself in the New York City news was when he owned these apartment buildings that were they were going from rental to co-op. He wanted to turn these apartments to co-ops so he could sell each individual apartment. And back in New York City at the time, they were making a killing, okay? Because if they owned a building, let's say it was worth, $500,000, the whole building was worth $500,000. They could sell 20 apartments in that building for $100,000 each. So, a $500,000 dollar building was suddenly worth $2 million by going turning them to condos or into co-ops. So Trump was trying to do that. But what happened was in New York City is when they had elderly people that were in there under rent control, you couldn't get them out to do this. So Trump was trying to convert one of these buildings. And he was turning off the power, and he wasn't collecting the trash. So there was trash in the hallways, and people didn't have electricity. He was turning off the water. And they came and complained to him. And the news media says, hey, what's going on? You're trying to force his tenants out? And he goes, oh, no, I'm not. As a matter of fact, what I'm thinking of doing here is I'm going to make a homeless shelter into this building here. I'm going to invite homeless people to fill these apartments here. So, saying that to intimidate and threaten the tenants that were living there, that now suddenly there would be homeless junkies and stuff living in their hallways and in these empty apartment buildings, as Trump using as a tool to get them out of their apartments. Now, this is an issue that's kind of sensitive to me because this is something that happened to my grandmother. My grandmother had rented an apartment on 86th Street in Manhattan. My grandmother rented an apartment, and it was one of these, they used to call them a railroad flat, right? Because when you'd come in the front door, and I remember when I was a kid too, their bathtub was in the kitchen, and it had like a lid that you can put over it. And I always wanted, I think I took a bath in there one time. They let me take a bath in there. And you had to heat the water up on the stove. Okay. And in this tub, I think I took one bath in this bathtub. But it was a railroad flat, they called it, because you walked in the front door and you had to walk. There was no hallway. You walked through first the living room, then you walked through the first bedroom, you walked through the second bedroom and the third bedroom. You had to walk right through to get to the last bedroom. There's no other way to get around there. So, and the landlord wanted to do that thing. They were turning it co-op or condo. They wanted to get my grandmother out of there. And they did a lot of harassment on her, too. So I'm kind of sensitive to the kind of issue about these. So that was one of the things in this documentary by Libby. And you could find her, my interview with her in the Opperman Report member section at OppermanReport.com. By the way, you'll find a copy of David's book there, too, in the Opperman Report bookstore. In Libby's documentary, she talks about a very interesting incident. I remember watching this on the news too, but I didn't think anything of it at the time. There was a helicopter crash of roughly four around, Trump's top executives that worked for him all died in a helicopter crash one day. Now, looking back on Trump's life and his association with these organized crime figures, you wonder, and the fact that this helicopter company was a mob-run helicopter company. Who knows what really happened there? But the reason why it made it into the documentary is because when this helicopter first crashed, Trump made this big deal of, these my employees here, they were like family to me. They were part of the Trump family. We love them. And then a couple of months later, when he was in, one of his businesses was failing, he blamed it on those people that had died in the helicopter crash. He says, it was mismanagement by those former employees of mine who ran my company into the ground. That's Donald Trump for you, man. Wonderful guy. Wonderful guy. Wonderful guy. They had him on the news. He visited Louisiana there with a truck, an 18-wheeler. He brought it down there to donate to the poor flood victims. What does he bring in that truck? Play-Doh. He brings a bunch of toys to donate to flood victims. Because when you've been flooded out, you feel like playing with Play-Doh. That's what you want to do. And there was also, too, some watercolor paints, a little paint kit, like a toy paint kit you'd give to kids. Unbelievable, this guy. And then they show him unloading the truck. He's unloaded for 49 seconds, and then he gets back in his... The guy owns a helicopter. He's hooked up with this helicopter. He's got helicopters. He can't say, hey, man, I'll loan you guys some helicopters that will go rescue people off their roofs. Can't do that? Why not? For a couple of days? Give me a break. Got a question from the chat room. Ed, what do you think about his kids? Maybe you can talk about them for a while, if you know anything. Huh? Okay. That's the question. That's exactly how it's written. I want all questions in proper form from now on, just like Jeopardy. Okay, pretend we're on Jeopardy here. If you're going to ask me a question, do it correctly. I do know some stuff about Trump's kids. Okay? First of all, that Donald Jr. looks like he's got dropped on his head as a baby, you might want to say. But one thing I find interesting about the Trump clan is that they're all buddies with Jeffrey Epstein. The whole family. I'm nice. The whole family is friends with Jeffrey Epstein. All of their phone numbers were found in Jeffrey Epstein's little black book. Ivanka? Her number. Why does Jeffrey Epstein need to have phone conversations with Ivanka? What are they talking about? The two sons, the ones who like to go on those hunting trips, those safaris, and kill big animals in Africa. They're in there. And also, too, Ivana Trump, Trump's ex-wife, is in Jeffrey Epstein's phone book. It just makes you wonder, why is he carrying their phone numbers on in his personal phone book in his pocket? Okay, you got people, you have 100 people's phone number in your computer, your Rolodex or something like that. But that little phone book you carry around in your pocket, what do you got, Ivana and Ivanka? What's your connection to them? Another kind of creepy thing I found out about Trump is when Ivana got remarried to her new husband, she did it at Mar-a-Lago, and Trump was there at the wedding on his property, and he made it all about himself too. Like, he made a speech at the wedding. What kind of weird control freak this guy is. And also, too, the whole thing with Tiffany Trump, all these years until he ran for office, all this business about, I got my kids who went to the Wharton School and they're all on. Yes, man. Okay. On all these shows about The Apprentice, right? He makes this big deal about how his kids went to the Wharton School and they all work in his businesses and stuff like that. The one you wouldn't even think this kid existed is Tiffany Trump. Because until this election, right? And she spoke at the convention. You can tell she's not, hasn't had the same upbringing as the Trump sycophants of his family there. You never heard of Tiffany Trump. And the word it was because Tiffany Trump and her father had no relationship. She was raised by Marla Maples. Okay? See, Marla Maples was his second wife. All right? He was married to Ivana. He cheated on her with a million women, but he got caught cheating with Marla Maples. Wound up marrying Marla Maples. Marla Maples had Tiffany Trump and raised Tiffany Trump in California. I think Marla Maples is going to be on the next Dancing with the Stars, too. That's not a joke. She really is. So Trump lived in New York. Tiffany Trump was raised in California. How often could he have seen her when she was being raised? His daughter, flesh and blood, And it didn't appear that they had any kind of a relationship. The reason why Marla Maples and Trump got divorced is because I think it was in the Hamptons, or it might have been down there in Palm Beach and where Mar-a-Lago was, is that she was having all these kind of affairs with her bodyguards and stuff like that, the men that were driving her around. And she got caught one time having sex on the beach. This is the story, the rumor, that she got caught having sex on the beach with her driver, and they almost got arrested, but that it was all squashed and put on. So these two were kind of banished away to California. Goodbye. They don't want to talk to you anymore. They're gone. That's the story of Marla Maples. And then there's, was this Malankia, Natasha, whoever she is, this new one, the one he has now. He met her when she was modeling for Trump Modeling Agency. Okay? And that's very interesting. That's a whole interesting topic here that I wish Mr. David Cae Johnston would get into. Because I think this is important stuff, Now, Donald Trump, even one of the debates, he says, I know more about HB1 visas than anybody else. I'm an expert on them, and we're going to build a wall and keep these people out of here. He met Melania Trump because she was modeling for Trump Modeling Agency. Yep, Trump owns a modeling agency. Okay? And he's married to one of the models that used to work for him. So we know for an absolute fact, you can testify in court that he has no problem creeping on these girls that are working for him at the modeling agency because he married one. Right? Right? We can all agree on that? If you go to the Trump Modeling Agency website, it talks about how they want models from all over the world come and audition for the Trump Modeling Agency. Models as young as 12 years old. Now, you remember I told you about the HB1 visas. In all of his business practices that he's ever practiced in his life, he has used HB1 visas 1,000 times. Now, you just heard our friend there, Mr. David Cae Johnston, talking about these Irish workers that helped build Trump Tower because Trump had to bring them. That was a long time ago, guys. That was a long time ago. So in all of his work history, he's only imported 1,000 workers using HB1 visas. Now, you got to figure some of these people had to be like computer techs and stuff like that. You need them, right? You bring them in. Out of that 1,000, 250 of those HB1 visa applications were for Trump Modeling Agency. That he had to import 250 little girls for his modeling agency that we know for as young as 12, that we know for a fact he has no problem creeping on the models because he married one. That's a fact. Now, I brought up Jeffrey Epstein, and you guys know I do a lot of work on Jeffrey Epstein. Pierce Redmond did a great show, just played last night. You can find it in the archives of American Freedom Radio about Jeffrey Epstein. Jeffrey Epstein had a friend named Jean-Luc Brunel, who was a modeling scout. You can look him up. This guy has a notorious past, again, creeping on the models. Okay, these big old fat perverted guys who creep on these young girls, right? And he was also alleged to have given him roofies and stuff like that, and all kinds of stories like that. But in the Jeffrey Epstein saga, now, by the way, this guy's best friends with Jeffrey Epstein, better friends than Donald Trump is, because he went to visit Jeffrey Epstein every single week. As a matter of fact, Jeffrey Epstein was in that jail for 13 months. So I don't know how many weeks that turns out to be, but I did the math one time, and Brunel had visited Epstein in the visitor log more times than there were days that Epstein was in that jail. So it meant that a couple of times he had to visit him twice a day. I had to go there and visit him twice. If you've ever gone to visit somebody in a jail, I've done it plenty of times. It's a hassle. Okay, you got to wait. I'm sure they didn't have to wait. They probably had limousine take them right in there, go to the front of the line. But a normal guy, you want to go interview a witness in jail, it's a hassle getting in there and working out the logistics on that. But Jean-Luc Brunel, this modeling scout who has his own history of perving on these models and giving them roofies, allegedly, they did a whole 60 Minutes thing on him. Best friends with Jeffrey. His gig in this Epstein scam was that he had some kind of ability to get visas, to get these little girls in through visas, And there was a story that, he got a little girl 12 years old, sold him to Epstein. Then he brought in a plane load of French teenagers, right, for a birthday party for Epstein, and sent them back the next day. He's got these visas and plucking these little girls from other countries and bringing them into the United States. HB1 visas. That Donald Trump said out of his own mouth, I am an expert. I know more about HB1 visas than anybody else. Well, he did it 1,000 times, 250 times with little teenage models. But is that enough to declare that you're an expert? Unless maybe you've been chatting with a guy like Jean-Luc Brunel, okay, who's also an expert on these little teen models. Now, I wanted to do a show about Brunel, so I started snooping around, you know me. And I snooped around with I'm exhausted. Did an hour live last night, guys. Plus, I taped shows yesterday afternoon. I just did an hour. I wasn't expecting to do an hour live myself. And I got to produce a couple of guys. I'm exhausted.